your dry clothes because you are stopping off at the Cardpool. I'm your host, Stu Galetta.
And I'm Kyle Robertson.
And today we are talking about our top 10 hidden gems from Commander 2011.
This is part one of our two-part set review. You can check out the second part, which will be the top 10 money cards of Commander 2011. But without further ado, let's get on with the review.
Let's indeed, Kyle. And also, let's start with a small disclaimer saying that we're only doing exclusive cards to this set. So any other card that was released before this set came out is not going to be under review for us. But starting my list at number 10, we're going to go with Soul Snare. It is a 1-drop mono white enchantment that reads, pay 1 planes and sacrifice Soul Snare. Exile target creature that's attacking you or planeswalker you control. One of the reasons I really like this card the most is it goes really great in a lot of Enchantress kind of builds. Daxus the Return's a really great commander that was actually a commander in a later set that came out, but it is really good with those kind of synergies. It's recurable, something that White loves to use most is Sun Titan, and I mean, it's really got a whole bunch of nifty little power to it.
I agree with you there, Stu. It's kind of like the enchantment version of Delayed, Condemn, or Path to Exile in enchantment form. As you said, it can benefit a lot of enchantment decks that are out there, but total, it is more mana than something that's like a Condemn or a Path to Exile, in that it costs 2 mana to use in total instead of just 1. I also have a slight bit of a problem with this card because, like other enchantments of this sort, it's a trap. It just kind of sits out there, which is great and all, but the move is very telegraphed. Other players will not attack into that unless they're doing it with a number of creatures that are maybe interchangeable, or they really kind of know what they're doing there. Likely, it may just stop people from attacking you, which, hey, I guess that could be reason enough to play it right there, because it is a very low drop card. Personally, though, I would much rather have something unconditional and more surprising, like a Path to Exile, for example. But then again, some decks can use those cards, some decks would rather do other things, and this is a really good option to have out there.
Well, like you were saying with the telegraphing, that alone makes it so players have to plan accordingly to it and waste resources that they would otherwise want to save. So making them have to make hard decisions or just leave you alone is really good because, I mean, it's not affecting you. You're just waiting for the right moment to make this pop off. So, you know, pros and cons.
So I think we're going to go from a pretty niche card right there to another white card, but one that is much more widespread use, in my opinion. Number 10 on my list is Ark Angel of Strife. This is a white creature with a massive body and mana cost. It's a 7-drop, 5 colorless and double white, and it's a 6/6 angel with flying. As Ark Angel of Strife enters the battlefield, each player can choose either war or peace. Creatures controlled by players who chose war get +3/+0 as long as this guy's around, and creatures controlled by players who chose peace get +0/+3. So right here, you have a creature that allows you to choose, as it pretty much states, between war and peace. Do you want to buff your creatures on the defense, or do you want to buff your creatures on the offense? It's obviously very focused on multiplayer games, which is kind of what the Commander releases are all about, and they were, in these very early sets, experimenting with new mechanics like this. Kind of reminiscent of things from Conspiracy, actually, with cards like voting and whatnot. But since everybody gets the same bonuses, it kind of keeps an even playing field for the most part, because let's say you're just in a 2-player game, the first player chooses war, the second player chooses peace. It's kind of like nothing happens there, isn't it? Although if things do get through for damage, but someone who chose war, obviously they are going to do more damage. Alone, with a choice of war for the controlling player, this angel is a 9/6 flyer for 7, which I don't have to tell you is just really powerful on its own, and it's going to buff all of your other creatures. Of course, the downside of this is other players could choose to have their own creatures be buffed, but again, even if it is, I think, in my opinion, that's just pretty much still like an equal playing field.
Yeah, I can agree with you with that. I mean, it's almost like just Elish Norn's little cousin who just isn't fully up on stature with that, because compared to Elish Norn, it could be a board wipe. Where in this case, this is just something that's like an Anthem effect, which is really, really good. But the thing that I really like about it is because, kind of like with Soul Snare we mentioned before, with this being on the field, it only gives the players the buff while it's on the field. So players aren't going to target this creature, and they're not going to remove it, and they're not going to want to attack into it to lose their own creature or to remove the buff. Kind of gives you a little net of protection there, because they like this added bonus as much as you do, so they're going to let it stay around and be like, hey, you're my friend for right now, thank you for giving my token army a big boost because I am taking out player 2, and I don't like that player. So it's like, it's kind of funny in that kind of politics kind of play.
Personally, though, I have to say, I don't see why you would ever choose peace over war with this card, because I'm just an attack-focused, offensive type of player, and I'm all about finishing games off quickly, so I never really think toughness of creatures ever matters during a game, for the most part, so I don't really see that mode being useful. Just choose war, all your creatures get an attack bonus, that's great, have a good time, you'll win the game faster.
Well, counterexample to that, Kyle, sorry to burst your bubble, but peace could be good as well if you're running Doran. Now, this is a commander who loves to make it so combat damage is dealt due to its toughness over power. So in this case, you get both, which is really good. So, you know, not everyone's running this commander, but just a fun fact to note.
Yeah, that's true. I actually forgot about Doran. But going to our next card on the list here, Stu, I see we have a land.
Indeed, you know I love to pick these out, Kyle. And this is one that is a staple in Commander by no mere margin. Homeward Path. It's a land that comes into play on tap, produces 1 generic, and it also has another tap effect in which each player gains control of all creatures he or she owns. So right here, I say this is a land that passes the vanilla test, comes into play untapped, there's no contingencies on how you get mana, and also has an extra effect to boot, in which you can get added protection, especially if you're versing a very strong control shell deck that's all about stealing your permanents.
Absolutely, Stu, and this beats a lot of different steal effects that are out there, from the basic Threaten all the way up to really, really good cards like Zealous Conscripts, for example. The fact that you can take back things of yours that are stolen at instant speed for no mana is great, and the fact that you don't have to use a spell even to do it, you can just use one of your land slots, is also great. This can ruin entire end games of players who are basically using Insurrection and things like that to try to win the game that way. And also, when you're playing I like to call them gifting decks, like Zed Roo the Great-Hearted, where you basically give your creatures and other things to other people for profit, you can call your creatures back when you need them, which is pretty good if you're just giving things out there and not putting a lot of yours out there in return.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, if you go for like some sort of chaos kind of builds with Zed Roo or any other kind of chaos deck, like Scrambleverse is like one of the biggest chaos cards out there that I really think of. And this land right here just totally nullifies it. It just says, hey, you wasted all this mana. Let me just play this real quick, tap it, and, you know, game got some sanity back. It's pretty interesting. And I mean, it's not uncommon to see these kind of steal effects. There's tons of commanders out there. Centriplets, Marit Rebrit, and Empress Galena. Like, those are just a small handful to name a few. But also, I'd like to point out there is one weakness to this card, and it's very funny to me because it's called Vidalcan Plotter. Now, this is an old schoolish kind of card in which when it enters, you choose a land, and you choose a land an opponent controls, and you take control over that one. If you go ahead and you steal their Homeward Path, there's no way for them to get that back with Homeward Path, because this one strictly says creatures. So it's kind of almost like slapping someone in the face if you can do it. I'm not sure exactly how often you'll see that play, but it can be kind of interesting.
And the fact that it works on everybody's stolen creatures, not just one player's, not just target creature, it means everybody is basically going to get the same kind of advantage from this. So I'm not sure how amazing that play is, but it's kind of funny, I'll admit.
Now, I see, Kyle, you're going to dip into our first red card on the list.
I am indeed, and this one is called Avatar of Slaughter, another big creature toward the bottom of my list. This one's an 8-drop. It costs 6 colorless and 2 red, and it's an avatar, as its name kind of suggests. It's also an 8/8, so a very large creature here. It has a simple effect, but a powerful one. All creatures have double strike and attack each turn if able. You read that right, all creatures, so not just you, not just your opponent, everybody. All creatures have double strike and have to attack every turn. This creates complete chaos on the battlefield, with everybody having to attack each other, maybe making bad choices at the same time. Things like Soul Snare that we discussed previously become live with all these attacking creatures, and double strike on all creatures can close out games really, really quickly. It also eliminates blockers for the most part, except for the random creature with Vigilance out there, or maybe something that can untap your creatures. So if you survive the first round with this, you are pretty likely to win, because at that point, your opponents will have swung out, and you basically have an open door to go to town on them. Of course, it's no certain guarantee, because everybody kind of gets the same advantage, like my Angel that I previously discussed, but still, this is very cool because it eliminates the idea of strategic attacking and blocking. It just encourages complete crazy aggression, and that's what Red is all about.
Yeah, indeed. And like this is also a really good anthem, like you said, Kyle. And I would love this in token armies just for the fact that they can just go ahead and reproduce like crazy. So you can go ahead and double, triple, quadruple block if you really need to. Your guys are on par with theirs, and you will overrun them in the end. So at the end point of this, you're just going to be able to, like you said, control the field, deal out stupid damage. But also, if you look at this guy, he's an 8/8 with double strike. That's scary right there. If he goes unchecked, that's 16 damage to the face, provided if you can give him trample or if the board's just reset. He's a great card. Very costly on the mana, but if he hits the field, he hits the field hard.
Yeah, and this is an end game, and I'm actually really surprised that I don't see more people playing with this card, because I think it's great.
Yeah, it's almost like Red's version of Overrun. Now, Overrun's for green, and that's usually a great way to kill someone, or Triumph of the Hordes, for example. But for Red, who just typically can grow creatures and not really do much with them, this is something that gives it a lot of versatility and can be, like you said, your game ender, your win con.
Well, going to another new color, Stu, we have a green card next on your list. Want to tell us about it?
My number 8 is going to be going to a card called Collective Voyage. It costs 1 green, and it is a sorcery. And it has the effect of Join Forces. So starting with you, each player may pay any amount of mana. Each player searches his or her library for up to X basic land cards, where X is the total amount of mana paid this way. Put them into the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. So right here we have a really big group hug style of ramp in which you pay this card's cost, and then with whatever extra mana you have out, you go ahead and you funnel it into this. But not just you, every player, because every player who doesn't typically run green is going to try to ramp as hard as you. Inherently, you're going to hopefully ramp harder than them, but it's a really strong card for the fact of just how massive the deck thinning it can be on this card.
You're right, Stu. It is a pretty good ramp spell that will make you a lot of friends and really accelerates the game very quickly, especially given the fact that you can play this on the first couple of turns and kind of move things into the mid-game or even late-game stage almost immediately. However, the downside is that unlike the Tempt with Discovery card from the later Commander sets that I actually love, everyone kind of gets the same output as this and could potentially put their mana to better use than you, depending on what hand you kind of have at the moment. It's also not particularly awesome in the early game because on the first couple of turns, people are going to probably be playing things and don't have a lot of extra mana to use.
Well, I agree with you with that, Kyle. I mean, if people are tapping out for mana, then yeah, they're tapped out. But I mean, you're also going to have the people who can durdle. Like, they don't have any of their 2-drops or their 3-drops yet, or they didn't play anything on their first turn. So it can be beefed up. But I like it more in the late game, like you were saying. And I think this really shines in a deck like Omnath, Locus of Rage, because it's all about landfall. So if you're running a landfall deck, this is a great way for you to get a whole bunch of lands out really quick to abuse certain effects. And also the thing that I really do like about this card is if people do need the mana, they will tap out for it. Be like, this is more important than for me to leave up mana for this. Or like, I actually don't have anything, so I don't have to pretend like I do, and just actually get the gains out of it. So this way you can kind of have a little bit of clarity to what the board state is. The combo tricks are out, there's no instance. You can go ahead and play off where you need to.
That may be true, Stu, but also wise players will just sit back and kind of let this thing happen. They're not going to spend their mana when they could be using it instead to cast a counterspell or something because they know other players are probably going to use this, and no matter what they do or don't do, they get the same benefit out of it that everyone else does. That's another reason why I like Tempt with Discovery more, is because there are real consequences for you as a player to not choosing anything. With this card, there really aren't, so it is possible to just sit back and relax while other people do all the work for you.
Well, yes and no. Also, what you're doing here is, again, all the lands come into play tapped, so you're not painting a target on your head. If anything, you're making it so you're putting fire with their gasoline that they just got, and they are all taking note of it. So by doing that, they're like, all right, he's got 6 mana, he's got 3 mana, he's got 5, whatever the numbers are. It's like, all right, that's commander fodder right there. So, all right, I'm not going to waste anything on his turn because at this point, all these lands are coming into play tapped, and he just tapped out doing this. So they're concerned about other people's plays, not yours. And by the time it comes around to you again, you should be sitting pretty. But anyway, enough about this. And Kyle, let's move on to a color that you are claiming to be one of the best in the game.
Haha, well, it is the best in the game, Stu. That is a fact. We are really jumping around in the colors here. We're going to a blue card, and it's Riddle Keeper at number 8 on my list. It's a 3-drop creature, 2 colorless and 1 blue, and it's a homunculus. You don't really see that type that much. It's also a 1/4, although I'm crossing my fingers for homunculus tribal to be a thing one of these days. I guess we'll see. Whenever a creature attacks you or a planeswalker you control, that creature's controller puts the top 2 cards of their deck into their graveyard. I don't have a ton to say about this card, other than I just think it is really cool. It's very good toughness for its cost, nice power to toughness ratio, very good early to mid-game wall sort of creature that will discourage people from attacking you on multiple fronts, actually. It's a very interesting kind of passive milling ability that I don't really see in a lot of other places, and you can say with milling cards that they sometimes don't do a whole lot against strategies that like to especially go wide with tokens and just swarm over you before you have the chance to do anything. Riddle Keeper can kind of help put the kibosh on those kind of strategies, because if they're attacking you with too much, they're going to risk milling themselves out in order to do it, and especially when you're playing against a blue deck, that's not really a good place to be.
I agree, Kyle. I mean, this is something that's better than one of those like one-shot effects that you usually see, and those are typically in other formats like Modern or Standard, for example, where it's like, all right, go ahead, play Mind Funeral, go ahead, do something else, make him discard a card and mill 2. This is something that can keep growing and it's continuous. The only thing that I say is a downside to this is that they have to attack you. This is an effect I would love to see just whenever an opponent attacks. So for something compared to like Hedron Crab, like you can see like how one can kind of shift a little bit more of a preemptive effect to start off. But this is something, again, that late game, if they're going to go ahead and swing at you with the big token army, they're going to have to start thinking about, all right, how much is going to be left to my library? Because just when they declare the attack is when they mill, and that's a really big thing. It's not when the damage goes in, so they can go ahead and do their attack and then be like, crap, I miscalculated. Well, too late, you're already dead.
Well, having a nice milling effect like this and also having a big butt means he's perfectly at home in like a Phoenix God of Deception mill deck, which is a really cool deck that I advise more people to check out because it can be very powerful. The only thing I kind of think about with this card is, would I rather have this or Propaganda? Would I rather have people paying 2 mana to attack me with all their creatures, or would I rather have them milling 2? Because sometimes milling other people can be something that they want, especially against a Sidisi deck. This would just be like the worst card to play if you're facing down Sidisi. I don't know. Those 2 cards are very comparable, and I'm not really sure which one would be the one that I would want most of the time. I think probably Propaganda, but Riddle Keeper has homes too.
Yeah, definitely. And this is a great budget option. Like, the more you start looking at mill cards, like, oh, I like this one. Oh, I like this one. And this actually was one when I was looking at into making a mill deck to be like, is it going to make the cut? Just shy, but, I mean, it filled in the spot while I need to get the more expensive cards. So it does work. It is something to take note of. So going back to the idea of stealing permanent, my number 7 is going to be going to Zed Roo, the Great-Hearted. Now this is a 4-drop, 1 generic, a red, a white, and a blue for a legendary creature Minotaur Monk, and with a 2/4 body. At the beginning of your upkeep, you gain X life and draw X cards, where X is the number of permanents that you own that your opponents control. He also has the added effect of paying 1 red, 1 white, and 1 blue, aka Jeskai. Target opponent gains control of target permanent you control. So this is a legendary commander, and yes, this is a card that is a commander, to go ahead and make the board chaotic. So this is kind of like Harmless Offering on a stick that is recurable, but also has a life gain engine onto it.
Yeah, this could potentially be really powerful. It's kind of a strange ability, which can be risky. Obviously, it's risky giving other people your stuff, and you can give them anything. You can give them lands, you can give them creatures, you can give them anything. But it might pay off in the long run, because that ability really adds up very quickly. You're going to be drawing a lot of cards, you're going to be gaining a lot of life. It combos very well with some cards like Perplexing Chimera, a Crowan Horse, Illusions of Grandeur is a particularly nasty one. You can be nice with Zed Roo, or you can be really, really mean, and there are things that you can do to basically get something, get a beneficial effect, and then swap it out and make someone else lose the game because of it. It can be a very interesting political card in Commander. However, I do have to say about this card, I take issue with his creature type, because I don't know how he's a Minotaur. He's clearly a goat. And they missed their opportunity to make him a goat tribal commander. That's all I'm saying.
That would be pretty awesome. Well, the thing that I really like about him with the permanent stealing is that if you go ahead and exchange a permanent with a global effect, that you're not really losing anything. So what I mean by global effect are things that just affect the whole board. So like Possibility Storm, Torpor Orb, those are some things that just affect every player on what they're casting and what happens on the field. So you could lose something, but you're not losing something. It's still affecting how everything else goes. So it's a no-loss scenario. But also, I really do like this card for the fact of the life gain, because you don't really see life gain outside of white and black. Yes, this is running white, but you don't really see it with red and blue. It's very odd in that case. So if you really want to go ahead and make some sort of janky, off-the-grid life gain deck, you really could. And I mean, just think about, like, Test of Endurance, Feldwar Sovereign, or, I mean, the classic Aetherflux Reservoir. Like, those are all really good cards that you could just throw in here. No one will be prepared for it. And, like, you just go ahead and you go off and you win. Or you just take a player out of the game. It's really strong life gain. But that's enough about Zed Roo. And, Kyle, for your next card, I can't believe I didn't see this in the set. This is 100% a card I would choose.
Well, yes, my number 7 here is Martyrs Bond. It is a white enchantment, costs 6, 4 colorless and 2 white. When Martyr's Bond or another non-land permanent you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices a permanent that shares a card type with it. Yes, the inevitable comparison to Grave Pact is entirely justified. This is kind of a hybrid of Grave Pact and Karmic Justice, because it's not only a Grave Pact in white, which is sort of weird, but also there is the fact that it can work with any kind of non-land permanents, be they enchantments, or creatures, or artifacts, or even planeswalkers, possibly. It doesn't just focus on creatures, which makes it potentially even more powerful than something like Grave Pact or Dictate of Erebos. White does have some ways of sacrificing creatures, and also sacrificing enchantments as well. Also, obviously, recurring both of them for value is something that White does very well. I'm not really sure what kind of deck Martyrs Bond belongs in, other than maybe a deck with black in it as well, because black is very good at sacrificing creatures and whatnot. I'm not sure you would just stick this in any white deck and call it a day, but there are certain places where having a third, basically, Grave Pact is not a bad idea.
No, not at all. And I mean, whenever there's one Grave Pact in the field, everyone's terrified that another will come out. Like Dictate of Erebos flashed in. Oh, hey, you chose this permanent? Well, yeah, guess what? You have to lose 2 now. My mistake. But I love the comparison with Karmic Justice. It really is almost the same kind of card, and I absolutely love it. And, I mean, this is a very similar style. Like, if anyone out there has ever made a Shatter Gang Brothers deck, it's very similar to this. Hey, I don't mind losing something because you're definitely going to be hurting from it. And people will definitely factor that in when it comes to the removal, their board wipes, and they have to be a lot more methodical with it. So with all this talk about Grave Pact, we have to talk about something that has black in it. So I'm making my number 6, Skullbriar, the Walking Grave. Now this is a legendary creature, a zombie elemental, who only costs 1 Golgari. That means a black and a green. And it has a 1/1 body. Now this creature has a great amount of effects. So it has haste to start off with, which is really good. It also has, whenever Skullbriar, the Walking Grave, deals combat damage to a player, put a 1/1 counter on it. Counters remain on Skullbriar as it moves to any zone other than the player's hand or library. So to break this card down very quickly, this is literally the only green-black legendary commander that I can think of that is actually aggro and works completely amazing as aggro and commander. And I've actually played against this guy before, and literally every time I've ever played against this guy, it's not uncommon to see the opponent mulligan down to like 5 cards in their hand, because they have to make sure that they have the land fixing and they have the way to give it the ability to grow so that it can keep on growing.
I really hate Skullbriar. I have some very bad memories about this card. It comes out on usually turn 2, maybe even turn 1 in some really rare cases, and as soon as it gets one swing in, the value is just going to continue to grow. It's an incredibly powerful Voltron commander. It can also work with counter synergies with Mazarek, Rayhan, or any of those other green-black commanders. It has haste, which is crazy, so it can come out early and start swinging, like I said, before anybody has blockers, or probably even any early game removal. And the problem is it grows so fast that most of the time, the removal can't keep up with how big it is. Especially the fact that Kin's counters stay on this guy, which is just a really bizarre, nutty kind of ability, which we haven't really ever seen again, it will always remain a threat in the late game. It's not like, oh, I put this back in the command zone and we're not in any danger anymore. This guy actually only got better with the commander rules change of late, because now if he gets Cyclonic Rifted, for example, instead of having to put him back in the hand and one of the few things that would actually reset his counters, no, they can put him back in the command zone and he'll keep his counters. I actually haven't seen a lot of Skullbriar recently, which shocks me. I would think he'd be very competitive still, and I hate him, but also I can really respect the power level here.
Oh my god, yeah. And especially for the fact, if you think about it, what typically comes out on turn 2? Signets, right? Or mana rocks. So typically, alright, maybe they're lucky enough, they go ahead, turn 1, they play the Soul Ring. What's the next thing they're going to do? Drop more mana rocks, drop more ramp. Very rarely they'll drop a creature unless it's like their commander, which is low costed. So this guy is going to hit at least one player, if not multiple, and by the time people have answers for him, it's going to be too late. And like you said with Cyclonic Rift, it's not uncommon to see somebody go ahead and cast Cyclonic Rift, not for its overload, just to make it so it stops coming and stops getting counters.
Yeah, and I also should point out that Skullbriar is a zombie as well, which means there's all kinds of crazy support out there to make him even more powerful than he already is. But speaking of zombies, that's actually a nice transition to my next card, which, again, is one that I'm actually shocked doesn't see more play than it currently does. It's called Siphon Flesh. This is a black sorcery. It costs 5, 4 colorless, and 1 black. Each other player sacrifices a creature. You put a 2/2 black zombie creature token onto the battlefield for each creature sacrificed in this way. This very, very strongly reminds me of Kalita's Trader of Get, my probably favorite mono-black commander option, who basically makes you tokens whenever somebody else's creatures die. This is very similar. Not only does it target all of your opponents, but you also get tokens for each creature that dies. That is great value right there. The only kind of downside I can see with it is, as always with sacrifice cards, you're pretty much leaving it up to your opponent which creatures die, which can either be not great for you because they'll just get rid of a token or a small creature that doesn't really matter, or they could enable some kind of death or sacrifice engine that they have that's not necessarily a good thing for you. But I just think the big tempo swing that this can potentially provide makes it even better than a card like Fleshbag Marauder, for example, because you're not only sacrificing creatures, you're also getting creatures of your own, which can provide for fodder for things like attrition, or even more kind of things like that that you can use to get the leg up on people.
Black loves its sacrifice outlets, and it loves its, hey, you lose stuff, I get stuff in return. So this is black at its core. The only thing that I can kind of see being a little niche with this is its mana cost. It's pretty high costed, and typically for that you would almost want a board wipe, especially with Damnation being reprinted. Like, which one would you want in comparison? Something that would remove everything, or something that will affect everyone a little bit and you grow your board? A little timey, and again, it does depend on the commander. Like, if I was running a Ghoul Caller Gisa deck or a Scarab God deck, like, you know, I might want this over that because, alright, I'm removing that, I'm getting more zombies, or I'm taking this out, now I can go ahead and do this. Like, it has its plays, it has its combos, and it's definitely a card to take note, especially because you get all the gain. You're not hurting yourself with this.
Very true, Stu. Very true. We're going to now, I guess, seesaw back into green for the next card, speaking of sacrificing things. This also does that.
Yes, indeed, Kyle. And this is almost green's variant of your card. It's called Tribute to the Wild. It costs 2 mana, 1 generic, and a green for an instant. It reads, each opponent sacrifices an artifact or enchantment. So this is the same kind of idea that you have, except for where black likes to kill its creatures, green loves to kill its artifacts and enchantments. So the reason I like this one is comparing the mana cost. Right here we're looking at 2 mana. For 2 mana, you're killing 3 things. But, I mean, it's sacrifice. And if you look at it, it's not just one permanent type, it's 2. So the chances of them having at least one of those 2 is really good. And if you look at basic math, 3 for 2, that's 3 is always greater than 2. So there's no reason why you wouldn't really want to use this card.
Well, and much like Siphon Flesh, like we were just discussing, this doesn't affect you. It just affects other people. It also has kind of a leg up on Siphon Flesh in that, 1, it's an instant, which means you can really get some good value out of this from the surprise factor. Also, Unlike creatures, which generally there are a lot out at any given time, players generally don't have that many artifacts or even that many enchantments out all at the same time, which makes it a greater likelihood that you're going to be able to hit something with this. It's great for a commander like Mazarek, Crawl Death Priest. This is an integral card to be in that deck because not only are you possibly hitting 2 or maybe even 3 or more different cards from this, but it's just going to grow your army with Mazarek. So it's really fantastic. It also gets around things with possible indestructible, hexproof, and shroud. Not a ton of artifacts and enchantments have those, but some do.
Yeah, and the ones that do, you definitely got to take note of. Like Helix Pinnacle, for example. Yeah, that has hexproof, and if you don't get rid of that soon, you're really going to be in trouble, aka lose the game. But I really like this also as a niche card for Shatter Gang Brothers, like I mentioned before. If you go ahead and remove a variable in their equation, well now they're not going to be planning for something at instant speed to be lost as well. So you can make them be punished for one permanent and then another, and it ruins their entire play thinking that they're safe. So this is something I feel like could be home in almost any green deck, or anything that just doesn't care for artifacts and enchantments. So I see, Kyle, you're falling in love with another angel here.
Yes, kind of continuing a theme here, and I'm going to go for my first legendary creature of this list. We have Basara, Battle Seraph. This is a Boros legendary creature and an angel at that. It's 3 colorless, a red and a white to cast. It's also a 4/4 with flying, and she has 2 abilities. Players can't cast spells during combat. You can also tap 1 red to make target creature attack this turn if able. I've kind of ranked the commanders that I chose for my list of Commander 2011 by their usefulness to me, and Basara kind of falls into the category of not really that great as a commander herself, but a pretty good part of the 99 in almost any Boros-colored deck. The ability to push people into attacking when they don't want to can basically turn things even further to your advantage than they already were with her ability, as we've talked with many other cards. Also, forcing people to play removal outside of combat can be very, very useful because it basically blanks cards like Condemn completely and stops you from playing something like a Swords to Plowshares or a Path to Exile mid-combat to wreck somebody's synergy. It forces you to do it preemptively, which could inform the other people's decisions later on.
Aether Spouts is one card that I love playing on people because they just never remember it exists, and it's just so good because it just totally ruins their draw, it ruins their field, and it gives them horrible scenarios to be in. So being able to totally nullify something like that is really big. And I mean, if you think about it, this is almost like a combination of Grand Abolisher meets Rage Nimbus in effect. Like, literally, it's almost the same thing. But it has decent stats, and I think a real deck that this could shine in is Kalia of the Vast, just for the fact that you're bringing this in on combat in the battle, and the combat step is the most important part of this commander. So it totally does shine as a 99. Maybe as a commander, it'd be kind of a niche build, but it could work.
Well, I guess we're going back to black now, Stu, and this is interesting, an aura. I don't really see too many of these on our lists.
Nah, I had to take credit where credit was due. Vow of Malice is going to be my choice. It costs 2 generic and a black, and it's an aura like you said, Kyle. And this one is enchanted on a creature. Now, the enchanted creature gets +2/2 and has Intimidate, and can't attack you or a planeswalker you control. So right here we have a very unusual thing because typically, you're playing stuff to hinder an opponent's creature to attack just in general. It can't attack or it can't block or something of that kind of suit. But you get to choose on whatever creature, you're giving it a buff, where typically that never happens. So you're saying, hey, go hit this guy on some steroids. I'll make it so that you can't even be blocked all the time. But just don't mess with me. It's very kind of like a Godfather kind of way. Like, you kiss my rings? Alright, you're kind of good. Go out there, go destroy some stuff. So this is really cool because this can work either on your creature or on somebody else's. Like, you're not going to attack yourself because, alright, it's your creature. So giving something +2/2 and Intimidate is great. And there's tons of commanders out there that would love to have that evasion and love to have that boost. But let's say if you're down and somebody has this powerhouse, like Terastodon or Woodfall Primus or Blightsteel Colossus for that example. Play this on them, you're safe. You're safe as long as that enchantment is on there, and typically they're not really going to care too much that it's on there because you inherently help them. The only reason they would hate that is if you're using some sort of mechanic like the Monarch or Dethrone, and they have to hit you to get some sort of added effect. But beyond that, you're totally fine. You're saying, hey, I'm not messing with your strategy. Just go have a great time destroying stuff.
I don't normally love cards like pacifism in EDH, but a black pacifism, possible anyway, that's definitely something to take note of, and that's really interesting, because with these kind of cards, you don't generally think about that. You can enchant them on other creatures, but why would you ever want to do that? This is one of those rare instances where it actually might be a good thing. It can be a pretty good insurance policy also to make sure that your commander or any one of your other creatures isn't stolen and used against you, or really any creature like that. It's very much similar to Assault Suit, which, while it may encourage the swapping of control, also stops the thing from boomeranging and backfiring back on you.
Arrest is a card that costs the same kind of mana, and it makes it so that you're kind of safe from an effect. Well, yes, you play that on somebody, they're not going to be happy. You play it on the commander, they can't use it. They play it on a creature that's a combo piece, they can't use it. But now, let me say, hey, go crazy, just don't bother me. That's kind of like what you're saying in this case, and it's like, alright, you almost just made an ally there. If you put this on someone's Master of Cruelties, would they really fault you for that? No, they're like, alright man, this is totally cool, thank you very much, and we're taking out this player over here. It's got great camaraderie with it, and I just love it.
Well, continuing my run of legendary creatures, number 4 on my list of hidden gems is going to be Vishkal the Blood Arbiter. This is a black and white creature with a rather hefty mana cost. It's 7, 4 colorless, 1 white, and 2 black, and it's a legendary vampire. He has flying and lifelink on a 5/5 body. You can sacrifice a creature to put X +1/+1 counters on Vishkal, where X is the sacrificed creature's power. You can also remove all +1/+1 counters from Vishkal to have target creature get -1/-1 until the end of the turn for each counter that was removed in this way. There's a little bit to get a hang of here, but basically what you've got is a somewhat highly costed and slow creature, and as I've said many a time, I generally don't like commanders that are costing 6 mana or more to play, because I feel like they're just too low impact, too late in the game. However, this, with the combination of flying and lifelink and the potential to get huge very quickly, can be a very dominating force on the battlefield. He's also a really relevant creature type, vampire. There's a ton of tribal support for that, which has just gotten better with Ixalan and the recent commander releases. Lifelink damage can swing the game back in your favor very quickly. Vishkal also enables all kinds of sacrifice engines like Grave Pact to keep people's boards empty without even using his second effect to kill things.
Yeah, free sack outlets are nothing to forget about, because if someone goes in board wipes, you can go ahead and do some crazy stuff with it. And I mean, with his being instant speed, no mana cost effects, that's something to really, really take note of. And I mean, also, if they go ahead and board wipe and they have indestructible creatures out there, it doesn't matter with him, because at this point what you do is you just go ahead and you give them -1/-1. That's not destroy, it's just lowering them down to 0. And once that happens, they're off the board anyways. It makes it so an opponent has to reconsider when they're doing stuff. And I actually do like this card as a commander. It does work. Yes, it is a little costly, but it is something that can really synergize with its creature type and the colors.
Something you do have to keep in mind with Vishkal, though a bit of a technicality on his ability, is that all of the counters must be removed at once, and has to be targeting only one creature. So if you just go crazy sacrificing a bunch of your creatures to pump him up to an enormous level, and then somebody plays a problem card, you can't just be like, oh, I'm going to remove enough counters that it'll kill that creature and keep all the rest. No. That's not how this card works, which is kind of strange, and I think was maybe an oversight on the part of the designers. But on the other hand, looking at the card that way, it might be a little too powerful even, so I guess I can't fault that.
Well, no, it depends on how you use this, and I mean, I guarantee you, the more you start playing this commander, you would see it, is if somebody does go ahead and board wipe and they have indestructible creatures, you would go ahead and do it in sections. Alright, I sacrifice this creature, I use this effect to remove the counters. Then I sacrifice this creature, and then I go ahead and remove these counters. So you have to be clever with it, which is what you are saying. And again, you can also remove the counters at any point. It is instant speed. Go ahead, you attack, get the lifelink, then go ahead and bam, remove the counters. So you can go ahead and be very crafty and very unique with this, which is very unusual at some sort of free sack outlet kind of engine. Usually you have to have something on the board to make it so this can be possible. So it's something to definitely take note of.
And this one, I'm going to be a little bit more generous than I was with Basandra in that I think he could maybe be a good commander, but still, more likely, much more likely to be just part of the 99 in any given deck.
Agree to disagree, Kyle, but you guys can let us know in the comments. Is this something to build as a deck, or is it something just to chuck in? Now, moving on to another card, I guarantee you, Kyle, you're not going to like it for how high it is on my list. Talking for number 3 at Trench Gorger. Now this costs a whopping 8 mana, 6 generic, and double blue. It is a Leviathan creature with a 6/6 body. It has trample, but it also has another effect of when it enters the battlefield. And when it does, you go ahead and you search your library for any number of land cards. You then exile them and shuffle your library. If you do that, Trench Gorger's power and toughness become equal to the number of cards exiled this way. So right here, this is a very unusual and unique card, especially for the fact that it is blue. If you were to read this and not know the color type, you would assume this to be green. It's got the mana cost, it has the effect playing with lands, so why is this blue? And that's the part that I think that really makes this card shine, is because it's giving blue something that it typically can't do, and that is really something to recognize here, because this goes ahead and optimizes your deck for the late game, which is really strong, especially in blue with drawing cards like crazy. So let's put it in a scenario. Kyle, how many lands do you typically run in a deck?
Oh, around 37 generally. Anywhere between 37 and 40, I think, is a good ratio for commander decks.
Okay, so that's a lot right there. And if you think about it, let's say you go ahead and you hard cast this on turn 6, 7, or 8. You have a lot of lands still left in the deck. And we'll say you're not even using mana rocks right there. So this is near mid to late game. What you want to do is start optimizing your draw, and an easy way to do this is by taking the lands out of the equation. Now, I'm not saying to take out all lands, because that's a very dangerous move. Somebody goes ahead and plays some sort of combo thing to blow up lands, you're out of the game at that point. But what I would do is I would remove the junk lands. And what I mean by junk lands is like something that comes into play tapped, like a guild gate, or a fetch land that comes into play tapped that is not going to be some sort of specialty shock land. Like if you're running Terramorphic Expanse or Revolving Wilds, those are lands that are going to be basic coming into play tapped. So honestly, wouldn't you want to just at that point draw the basic land and play it? You now can. You're making it so instead of playing with a high deck count of a number, you now are playing with a lower one, but you're optimizing your draws and you're not losing gas for it.
Well, I think you're right, Stu, and I think I might surprise you by how much I do actually like this card, just because of how interesting it is. I can't really pinpoint a deck that I would play this in, but it's very fun to consider. There are a lot of cards out there with this kind of effect, mostly, though, that affect non-land cards rather than land cards, Selective Memory being one example. The fact that you can remove lands from your deck, though, as you were saying, makes sure that all you draw is gas late in the game. I mean, once you get up to 8 or 10 or 12 mana, do you really need any more realistically? Some decks, the answer is probably yeah, but in others, probably not. You can cast pretty much anything at that point, and I just envision playing this card with haste, removing all the lands in your deck from the game, and then killing somebody with it. That is a very realistic scenario.
Yeah, and the fact that it has trample is really what makes it shine as well. This card's green at its core, and I absolutely love it for that. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily play this in like Rune of the Hidden Realm to keep flickering him in and out, because at that point, the more you do it, the more lands you have to remove to keep him up there to be high. So this could go into honestly any deck that runs blue. And again, you can even remove more lands if you want, because you're going to keep the mana rocks in there. You can't remove them. Boom, I draw a Soul Ring. I'll play this. My mana curve's still going up. Or boom, I play an Ignite. Or I play a Commander Sphere. Anything like that. So you can in turn not be shrinking your mana cap.
Well, I'm going to stick with blue, at least partially, and also around the theme of taking things from decks and elsewhere. My number 3 is going to be another legendary creature, the Mineo Plasm. This is a very interesting creature. It's in 3 colors. It takes 2 colorless, a green, a blue, and a black to play, which puts it in the Sultai color wedge. As the Mineo Plasm enters the battlefield, you may exile 2 creature cards from graveyards. If you do, it enters the battlefield as a copy of one of those cards, and with a number of counters on it equal to the power of the other card. And it is, I should say, an ooze creature and a base 0/0, so it entirely depends on the creatures that you get rid of, how strong this card ends up being. And obviously, things that are 0/0s most of the time will not be all that helpful. However, another ingredient to Ooze Tribal. Mark my words, it will be a thing someday. It must be a thing. But anyway, the Mineo Plasm is kind of a really cool and confusing card. I could go on and on for days about all the kind of degenerate combos you can put together with this card. It's very fun in Commander because it encourages either mill of other players or self-mill, so you can combine abilities and creatures and stats in crazy kind of ways that were never really meant to be put together, which inherently can lead to some very broken situations. It also makes this card kind of hard to rate because you never really know what you're going to hit with it unless you're specifically targeting your own deck, but this goes along with cards I love, like the Scarab God and Lazav Dimir Mastermind, where you're milling other people. You kind of depend the strength of your deck on what other people are playing, and that can be pretty fun. And this one even gets a boost from those guys because it has green in the equation here, which means you can ramp like crazy as well.
Yeah, you can go a whole bunch of different styles with this, like you said. And I mean, like Dredge, Reanimator, Grave Pack, or even just Voltron. Like, you can do so many different styles with this, which is very refreshing to see in a commander, to have so many different outlets for it to be accessible in and to strive in. I mean, heck, you could even put all of those I just named into one deck, and it would still service itself to be really good. Like, you can go ahead and, like, throw in any really good sack outlet you want either. Just to go ahead, hey, cheat something into play, it goes to the graveyard. Or you need to, like, draw stuff to your hand, let's play some Greater Good. Bring the commander out, sacrifice it, he's already big. Go ahead, put more stuff into the grave, bring him right back out, get another effect. It's almost like getting Genesis. Like, that's a creature that loves to stay in the graveyard because you can recur it. Well, this kind of gets around that mana cost in effect, because instead of having to pay the continual upkeep cost to get the card back, and then go ahead and recast it, if it's a card with a very expensive casting cost, like Terastodon will say, you can now circumnavigate that as long as you have another card in the grave. So it's almost like having a secondary hand.
This is actually what I think is the second best commander from this release, which is why it was so high up on my list. Who is the best one in my opinion, you may ask? Well, we'll get to that one in just a minute. But first, I think Stu actually has another card he wants to talk about that is also a very, very good commander option.
I'm also going to be keeping two of the colors and talking about a Simic legendary. His name is Edryx, Spymaster of Trest. It costs a generic, a green, and a blue for an elf rogue with a 2/2 body. And it reads, whenever a creature deals combat damage to one of your opponents, its controller may draw a card. So right here we have a very strong effect on a very low-costed creature who is an elf, which, I mean, that is one of the biggest types of creatures in the game. There's so many synergies you can do with this. There's so many different types of builds. But this is in Simic. Simic has the best of both worlds with creatures and drawing and control and everything in between. It's just got such a good build for the fact that it works on all your opponents and not you. So this is a huge political card and a huge force to be reckoned with as soon as it hits the field, because he will hit there and he will stay there because people don't mind him being out.
Yeah, there's a lot of things this guy has going for him. First of all, he's an elf, which means you can just go elf ball strategy all day, and that works almost perfectly with him. All that green ramp with blue to supplement it with unblockable creatures. That kind of led to Edryx being banned in multiple formats, including dual competitive commander, just because of how insanely good it is. He's probably, honestly, the best 1v1 commander of this entire release because, like I said, provides immense card advantage while also encouraging people to play with hard-to-block creatures like blue is just absolutely great at. You don't even have to play good cards to make this a good commander. You could play a deck full of garbage jank commons that are like, you know, the 1/1s for 1 that you throw out there that can't be blocked, and you could still win with this card if you had only a tiny handful of win cons like Beastmaster Ascension. It could totally be done, and that's why this card is so stupid good it had to be banned.
Yeah, and I mean, the more you start looking at what's good in green, blue, and in green-blue, the synergies are there. It pretty much grows itself. It just all depends on how big is your wallet, because you can go ahead and throw something in there like Trigon Predators, who's a pretty low-costed card. Or you start going all the way up the ladder to Gods. Play Crufix. He just only grows and grows with this card as well because it's just ridiculous. Keep the hand, keep the mana, and keep your opponents oppressed at all times.
As I said, going back to more legendary creatures, sticking to green, but going to some other colors as well, going to my favorite commander from this entire release, one that is both very, very scary to play against, but that I also really respect and love. Gave, Guru of Spores. This is a 5-drop commander in the Abzan colors, so it costs 2 colorless, 1 black, 1 green, and 1 white to play. He's also a fungus shaman, so I guess fungus is sort of a thing in this game, but anyway, he's a 0/0 just like the Mineo Plasm. However, he enters the battlefield with 5 +1/+1 counters, inherently making him a 5/5 for 5. Not bad. You can tap 1 colorless to either remove a +1/+1 counter from any creature you control to make a 1/1 Saproling token, or you can pay that 1 to sacrifice a creature and put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. There's so many cool things you can do with Gave, because he's in the best 3 token colors, being black, green, and white. Black kind of being an afterthought, but green and white especially. You combine this with something like Parallel Lives, and or Doubling Season, and or Anointed Procession. Things are going to start getting stupid and out of hand really, really quickly. Although, that is pretty much true of a lot of cards. However, he's cool because he also works with things we've already talked about, like Martyrs Bond, Grave Pact, Dictate of Erebos. You're basically growing an enormous army and not really losing anything in the process, while everyone else is being forced to sacrifice their creatures. This guy is probably the best multiplayer commander of the entire release, just because of pure synergy and combo potential alone. And as many players will testify, this is a force and a feared one to be reckoned with.
Remember, this is the first commander set to actually be created. So at the time, if you're running any type of green-white Selesnya token build, or mono-white or mono-green, pretty much this commander ate those decks. You can throw all those cards that were commanders into this deck with all their support, and it worked. You could do zombies. You could do Rise the Redeem. Take that whole build and just shove it down this guy's throat, and he would eat it all. It has so many great potentials. Now, I will also note that this is a card that can go into the 99. Now, very niche for 5-color, but Atraxa being the 4-color at the helm of this would be really good just for the proliferating on the counters effect. And like you said, Kyle, tons of ways to go ahead, get more counters, easy way to recur, great versatility, whether you need to go wide or narrow. So it is definitely one of the better commanders in this set. But, however, I will say it's not better than my commander, who I have chosen to be my number 1.
Alright, you want to tell us a little bit about that one then, Stu?
Yes, I will. And actually, I'll say he's even the same colors, Kyle, to add more of a point to saying how this is the best card in all the commander block. I am, of course, talking as number 1, Carador, Ghost Chieftain. It costs a whopping 8 mana, 5 generic, and like we said before, a black, a green, and a white for a legendary creature, Centaur Spirit, with a 3/4 body. Now, if the mana cost was putting you back, let me reiterate for you in a better way. Calador costs 1 less to cast for each creature card in your graveyard, which is phenomenal, but I'm going to wait a second to tell you about that. And also it has the other effect of saying, during each of your turns, you may cast 1 creature card from your graveyard. This is a bonkers commander for a whole bunch of reasons. The first one being is that Commander Tax no longer has an effect on this guy, provided that you have creatures in your graveyard. And you are definitely going to have creatures in your graveyard. You're in Golgari colors, and Golgari has the easiest time pretty much of all the colors of putting creatures into the grave. Because you have the green, who can recur anything from the grave, and you have black, which just loves putting stuff into the grave and pouring it in. But also to note, his second effect of being able to cast out a creature from the grave, once it comes into the field, it doesn't exile itself once it leaves. So you can grow the grave and use what you need. So you can make a very fun and ideal toolbox kind of deck in which you go ahead and mill yourself. Go ahead, use Mesmeric Orb. Use anything that exists for mill, because you're going to just go ahead and reap all the benefits for it.
Yeah, like the other commanders we've talked about, I have played against Carador many a time, and it can be very, very scary. Of course, being a graveyard-focused deck, like a lot of other ones, a simple Bajuka Bog or Nihil Spellbomb or any of those can really ruin your day. But aside from that, if this thing isn't disrupted, the payoff can be enormous. It's very much actually like Kess Dissident Mage, which was just released in the most recent Commander set. Kess lets you cast an instant or sorcery from your graveyard during your turn. Carador lets you do the same thing, except with creatures. And the benefit of casting creatures is they actually stay around after they get played. And there's so many good things you can do with that. one Buried Alive can basically win the game for you because you can assemble a combo in your graveyard, the most likely being something along the lines of Revelar, Karmic Guide, Viscera Seer, recast the Karmic Guide, bring back the Viscera Seer / Revelar, whichever one, and just kind of start going off from there. It's really not that hard. And if you were worried about the commander tax, this card pretty much eliminates it, because as long as you have enough creatures in your graveyard, he's only going to cost 3 to play.
There's only one commander I think that really does a great job of getting around the commander tax, and that's Derevi, because it flat out says on it that you can pay 4 at any time to recast it. This one I think is a very close second for being able to have that kind of evasion on it, and it is so strong for how it can be this kind of powerhouse that can essentially, if you have the right cards lined up, something that can come out turn 4.
Just by existing, this card makes a lot of other cards just way, way better than they actually were. For example, jank one-drop creatures like Spore Frog and Kami of False Hope that sacrifice themselves to basically fog for a turn. I normally wouldn't really play those in a deck because they're one shot and then you're done, and you would probably rather bring a lot better things back late in the game. But with Carador, it's not really a problem. You can just continuously keep bringing them back and fogging and just prevent any kind of damage that's going to be dealt to you.
Yeah, ideally, Altar of Dementia would be the best one because you just propel yourself forward by a great amount. Hey, I'll pay a little bit of mana. Oh yeah, let me dump a whole bunch out and then be set up for even future turns. Because at this point, even if you lose the commander, as soon as he comes back in, he's going to be costing at, what, minimum 3? That's still really, really good, especially as the game progresses into the late.
Any of these cards like Kess and Carador that turn the graveyard into a second hand, and even Scarab God can kind of be included in there too, they're all really powerful, and you should watch out for them, and this is why so many decks pack Grave Hate.
But moving away from all these colors, Kyle, looks like yours is in a whole other class.
It is indeed, Stu, and I had to pick this card over any of the legendary creatures in the set just because of how often I find myself using it. My number 1 for Commander 2011 is Chaos Warp. It's a card that's actually been reprinted several times in follow-up Commander sets, but it was first printed here. It is a red instant. It costs 2 colorless and 1 red to play. The owner of target permanent shuffles it into their library, and then reveals the top card of their library. If it's a permanent card, he or she puts it onto the battlefield. Now, you may look at this card and think it's not really a great piece of removal, and you may be right, you may be wrong, I don't know. It's kind of hard to classify this card just because of the pure random chance of its effect, but it's in red. This is the best piece of removal red has ever gotten. Period. Because not only does it work at instant speed like that, but it targets anything. Red usually has a very hard time getting rid of things unless they're creatures. It can't really touch enchantments. It can somewhat touch artifacts, but that's to a much lesser extent. This gets rid of anything. I mean, you can target planeswalkers that are a problem, enchantments, lands. Red does sometimes destroy lands, but this is on a whole nother level of that. It targets any permanent at all. The utility here and the speed of this removal is unprecedented by Red standards, and it has really never been followed up. It can be a risky card to play. There have been plenty of times where I got rid of a problem permanent only to have the whole thing blow up in my face. I remember one time specifically where I got rid of someone's commander with this only to have them cast an Ulamog from the top of their deck. That was not a fun time. But anyway, the risk I find is almost always worth the reward, and I personally think that this belongs in any deck that runs red, just because of the strength of this removal.
It's chaos, and that's what red loves, and it's very similar to a card like Gamble for red, where it is breaking what it typically does, but it's at a cost. And yeah, I agree with you. 100% hands down the best removal that is non-damage based. Now, it's very similar to what you see with green being Beast Within, or even Ablation in white, and those are also staples. This is 100% probably the best red card that's in every deck that runs red, just for the sheer ability to get rid of anything you need right then and there. And I mean, and most of the times you'll either hit a land or it'll whiff out on some sort of like instant or sorcery, but I think it's pretty rare that you will actually get something replaced in a higher situation. I just think you might have had bad luck on that Ulamog, Kyle.
It's possible. It is a situation that can come up, but like you said, Stu, I find that happens a very small percent of the time. Most of the time, this is basically like a Vindicate in red. You really can't beat that kind of effect.
So that is our pool time for today, and if the water felt just right, be sure to check out our following segment in which we discuss the top 10 money cards from Commander 2011.
And of course, if you like the toys we played with today, let us know if any of them surprised you or could make their way into your decks. You can tell us in the comments down below, or let us know on Twitter at TheCardPool. You can also reach us for any inquiries of your own by sending emails to mtgthecardpool@gmail.com. I'm Kyle Robertson.
And I'm Stu Galetta, and we will see you next time at the Card Pool.